Hola. Bueno, ¿estamos todos? ¿Todo el mundo sentado? Sí. Bueno, I'll do this in English. We're very happy to have Samar today with us. It's great designer who we've been following for a while now. I'm sure you're all very excited to hear from her. She's not only somebody who seems to have cracked the code of communicating in 3 different alphabets and seems to be fluent in flowing between those 3, and that makes her work very outstanding. But she's also somebody who, according to my research, has been from being a freelancer to running her own studio to joining Pentagram in less than 4 years. So of course, there's much more to that story, and I'm sure we're all eager to hear what she tells us. Her career goes back more than 20 years. And without any extension from my side, I'd like to welcome her to Elisava. We're all very looking forward to seeing you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me well at the back? Yeah? Great, thank you. Thank you, Pablo. Thank you, Mark. Hello, Barcelona. Thank you for having me here today. Beautiful city, beautiful people. So I will talk to you today a little bit about my career and what I've been doing up till now. My name is Samar, clearly, obvious. So this is a photo with me and 2 of my siblings. I grew up in Lebanon. And Lebanon really is a country that I'm sure you know had its fair share of, it really didn't have the most peace, it's not the most peaceful place. And not exactly in the most peaceful geographic location on the map. Lots of things happen in my lifetime. I'm not gonna go through that. It's a lot of problems. One thing that I kind of, there weren't really that many women role models when I was growing up. And I kind of posed this video on Amal Clooney. She's a lawyer, an incredible lawyer who really went after a lot of the bad guys, really kind of talented, able. But she got famous when she landed George Clooney. So maybe this is a little bit like me with Pentagram. I don't know. I joined if we think Pentagram is the George Clooney of design, I don't know if that's a good metaphor, but I joined since October 2023, and it's been 4 months. So, I don't have a lot to report because it's been only 4 months. So I thought maybe I can go back a few years and tell you, about my journey till now. And maybe if I come back in 5 years' time, I can tell you more about what I'm doing at Pentagram. So I went to the American University of Beirut to study. American University of Beirut is like the Elisava of Lebanon. I don't know if Elisava is better, but when I graduated, design was it looked mostly like those images on the right-hand side. So it was more kind of calligraphic instead of typographic, more handmade than digital. And that's not really because I'm old. I'm very old. This is not like a century ago. Maybe I'm a little bit older than some of you here. But this is really partly due to the complexity of the script and its relationship to technology. Some of you will know this, but I'll just go through like top line a few things. Arabic is still a cursive script, so the letters are connected, which means you have different forms for every letter, whatever it falls in the sentence. You have the reading direction, which is right to left instead of left to right, which when you come to navigation and technological products, the next is the back and the back is the next. And when you do like a line break, it goes backwards. And Adobe didn't really, I think at the time when I graduated, the technology wasn't really serving us like it did serve any Latin script. So you used to have to use dongles and plug in stuff and switch on things. It's better now. It's much better in terms of technology. But it's still not as straightforward as just like opening InDesign and typing in. And one of the also other complexities is that the Arabic script is really a very complex script that has so many typographic traditions, unlike serif and sans serif and humanist. And to migrate some of these traditions, now there's a lot of effort that's happening at that time in that field. But to migrate some of that into what you can see on your computer is quite a complex task. And there's a lot of people who are working on this today, now that the tool is better. So what that meant is that when I graduated, there was a lot of potential, a lot of things that we could do as designers. And, we could pick whatever we wanted. And, there was, it was very exciting time. And at the time, I was maybe like 21, 22. I used to go to this old cafe in Beirut called Modka. I couldn't find images of this cafe. It no longer exists in Beirut. It was there during the wartime. And I remember a man I met there who was in his 70s. And this guy used to kind of sit in Modka and sort of assess all the young people and their potential. So you go meet him, you have a chat, he can tell you, maybe you're talented, maybe you're not so talented. Very interesting guy. His story is that he was this big filmmaker who had done so many award-winning films. And unfortunately, none of them are left because they were burnt in a fire in the 80s. Later on in life, I discovered by someone who knows him as a relative that this story is not true. I mean, this is all heresy, people telling people. And that actually this guy only did one film. His house did burn down, but, nobody saw the rest of the film. So he used the story of the house burning down to talk about all this work that he'd produced. And he lived all his life sort of talking about this idea of all the things that he produced that there was no record of. And I was fascinated by that story because it made me think about ideas. Like everybody has ideas for films. You can probably say, I have this idea for a script and never really do it. And, maybe now in the time of Instagram, it's not the same, but this guy kind of was known for being a huge filmmaker and all he's done was one film. So this is kind of where, I started thinking, what's the difference between, talented people, who makes it, who doesn't make it? And that was kind of really in my early 20s. Then later on in life, maybe 15 years, I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I fell on this book called The Outlier by Malcolm Gladwell. And I gravitated towards this book because I always kind of identified as an outsider because of my story. So I never really I didn't really like groups. I always liked to do my own thing and maybe like come in and out of groups because I felt I didn't really want to be labeled. And that book actually is a great book. If you haven't read it, you probably find the Spanish version if you want. Malcolm Gladwell kind of establishes the difference between successful people who are talented and talented people who are not successful. And he gives you like a roadmap to how to get there. And there's a lot of really good wisdom in there. One of them is this idea of the 10,000 hours of expertise. He says that like to become good at something, you have to do about 10,000 hours, which equates to 3 years in a job. So if you want to be a good motion designer, you want to do 3 years of motion design, day in, day out, then you become really good. Talent alone is not enough. So it's sort of like, this was kind of his premise. And he backs it up with a lot of research. So I kind of like decided to tell you the story of my career through pie charts, and starting from, pie charts that sort of maybe on some level I was trying to kind of learn about things and move through stuff. So if you divide everybody's day, you have about 8 hours a day, which are your job. Then you have your environment, which is your family and your friends and the people you hang out with that you learn from. And then you have your aspirations, your dreams, the risks, the kind of odd things that come into a day-to-day. So for this, I created 6 categories. 2 categories for work. One is the work you really know how to do. So in this case, I'm talking about work you think you're expert at. And then the work where you're an amateur, where you kind of like don't really know how to do, but you're going to have a go anyway. And we're all amateurs at something, right? So we're not all experts at everything in our work. The second 2 parts are about life and kind of scenarios where you are familiar. So like you're in your home country, you're with your friends and family. And then scenarios that are very new, like when you're on holiday or when you travel to work somewhere else. And the last 2 are about risk and play. Play for me is the reason why I became a designer. Like when I was younger, considering like the political situation in Lebanon, I found a lot of joy in doing things that are, just doing things that are colorful, that are more engaged in terms of paper and material. So I kind of try to recreate those moments in my work. So the first 5 years after college, this is how I think my life divided. I would say I was an amateur at pretty much everything, because you graduate from college, you have some ideas, but it doesn't really apply in real life. I was playing a lot because I had nothing to lose, really. It's the first 5 years, this is when you experiment. And the rest of the stuff were kind of like in and out. It didn't really matter. So I had to kind of work out from being an amateur to becoming an expert. So I started doing a lot of stuff to get to the 10,000 hours. This is like the first 5 years after college, trying to. This is obviously, in hindsight, this is not planned, right? It's easier to tell the story 20 years later. So one of my first projects was a book that I did for a photographer called Parisa Damandan, and it documented the photographs from Iran before the Islamic Revolution. These photographs were smuggled from Iran to Beirut because there's images of prostitutes apparently in the record, and she only came with one CD, and we had to kind of work on this book. This book is out of print; it's very old, but it was really nice to kind of learn in design through that book. And this is kind of some of the images. You can see the prostitutes don't really look like prostitutes, but I mean, it was Iran. And there was a big part of my life at the time that was really experimenting, trying to kind of do things that I didn't know how to do, going outside my comfort zone. So one of the things was volunteering as a set designer in theater. And at the time, I knew nothing about theater, not let alone being a set designer. This started as a conversation with a director whose work I liked. And he said, "What do you do?" I said, "I'm a designer." He's like, "Oh," I said, do you need any help on one of your projects?" I was like, "Yeah, you can do the set design." I'm like, "Okay, I'll do the set design." So we ended up doing this performance called Looking for a Missing Employee. And the performance tells the story of an employee that goes missing in the Ministry of Finance. And all the performance is you follow the story via records of newspapers over 4 years. His work is very visual. So he uses a lot of imagery, and no one sits on stage, and it's all about our relationship to document fact, truth, and fiction. 10 years later, I had done about 6 performances with the same director. So this is another one called How Nancy Wished That Everything Was an April Fool's Joke. And this was a performance kind of documenting the story of the Lebanese Civil War, with people fighting with different political parties, dying, and then reviving again and continuing. There's a story to each set, so I'm not gonna, because there's like a lot, it's like a separate talk. But I guess what I was learning from this experience was really, first I was learning about my history, because the Lebanese history wasn't taught at school or college, because it's still contested. I was also learning about how design operated outside of a designer setting. So like, it's not a case study, it's more like you have a live audience and you're showing a piece and people react in the moment. I was also kind of increasing my exposure to art and theater and storytelling. And by doing these performances, we got to travel all around the world and just see like kind of performance festivals where there's a lot of great work. I also had a go at doing some events. I call them events, but they were actually parties. So we did I don't know why this is not playing. This is a party. It was kind of a New Year party based on Egyptian cinema. So we had a studio where people had to get disguised. They took tickets. Every ticket had like something to be inspired by. And we had all these people turn up. About 200 of them believed that we could throw events. So why not? If you believe you can do it, you most likely can. Have a go. So that was like a chapter, after college. It was a peaceful time in Lebanon at the time, until Hariri was assassinated in 2005. And this is when I moved to London. And here, the pie chart changed. In that case, although my English was very good, I found myself like going to meetings. And if you know anything about the English, you'd know that they could have an argument with you and they'll still be super polite. So you could miss it, So I'd go into these meetings and think, oh, the meeting was brilliant. And then I'll leave and think, oh, okay, well, what did I miss? So I constantly felt like, am I understanding them? Are they understanding me? There was all of this kind of cultural nuance that comes into coming from a culture that is different to yours and to where you are. So So here there was like the unfamiliar life kind of took over, and I sort of started to work through. I mean, in terms of like my work as a designer, I think I did a lot of projects in Lebanon, but they were not relevant to the British because they didn't know them. So I knew how to use the tools. So I'd say like 15% expertise, 15% amateur, because it was all kind of out of context. So as I was working, I noticed that I was doing like a few things in my work. The first one was to translate really the two worlds to each other somehow. And an example project of that is the 29 words for 29 letters. This is me trying to explain. It started really by explaining one of the words called zenkha, which is a word that describes the smell that fish and eggs leave on a plate. So every time I kind of like went to a restaurant, if you smell the glass and it smells of zenkha, I'd had to explain to the waiters, guys, this like you need to wash this with lemon, so the smell goes away. And then I expanded it into like a list of things that I explain in the worlds of design or life, and I just put them up on the website. So that's kind of one way of translating language or concepts. They say if you don't have a word for something, that something doesn't exist. So you sort of, share words that you cannot really translate to other people. Another example was through work. For example, Sesame Street, I did this project a while back. They were awarded some money to do some work in the Syrian refugee camps. And they were very anxious about working in Syrian refugee camps because they were sort of worried that they would do the wrong thing. This was a highly political environment. Sesame Street is an incredibly loved brand, so they're just kind of like a bit anxious. So apart from helping them with kind of creating a brand mark and sort of navigating all the different typographic formations, so we showed them options and we helped them sort of understand all these options. I think maybe that the most kind of active translation here was to go around their color scheme and to sort of show them in terms of, what exists in that area in relation to their color scheme. So this was like a chart. I remember when I was searching all these logos to put them in, I had to use a computer that was secure. So MI6 don't come after me, because I was just like, what are you doing Googling all of these logos? They're all trouble. So that was kind of like one thing that I was doing at the time. Another thing was localizing. So we had like, I've been contacted by a lot of brands that wanted to go into the Middle East, one of which was Apple. Apple have their ways of work. They're very kind of, big company, very established, but they didn't have a store in the Middle East, and that was 2015. So they came to me and they were like, okay, well, we don't know what to do with the website. I know it's right to left, but what are you going to do? Are we going to change all our assets? So we kind of worked on a strategy to change the website without having to recreate all the visual assets. And then they do, for the stores, they do the barricades where they kind of put a barricade in front of the store. So I connected them to Samir Sayer, who was my teacher in college. This is a guy who's like done so much for calligraphy and typography in Arabic, but he doesn't exist online. And this was also a very interesting relationship in the sense that they're like, oh, we have to speak to the agent. But people don't have, like, illustrators and typographers don't have agents in the Middle East. Like, you just call him. So like, I'm trying to tell Apple, don't worry about the agent. Let's just call him, have a coffee. So you're kind of like negotiating all of these relationships. And this was the barricade we created for Abu Dhabi, which was a bit more traditional. And this one was for Dubai. So something more kind of geometric versus something more calligraphic. And then about 2015 as well, 2014, this is kind of the first form of integrating. How can you integrate all the things from two worlds? And this was a brand we created. I created it at MC Saatchi, which was an advertising agency that was doing brand identity. And they were actually keen to get the advertising campaign for this. So we created this brand mark that kind of put the Arabic on top of the English. It was a very difficult idea to execute, but they sort of liked it because they were after putting it on a car number plate, which means that it needed to be compact and small. Before we got there, we did about 100 iterations of all the different things that we could do, but they were after something that's very small and compact. And even till this day, they still charge about $200 to put the brand mark on the car number plate. I mean, I wish I charged royalties at the time, but I didn't know. It's just... And then, so that kind of gives you an overview of what I was doing. Some projects, not everything. But in 2021, I decided to start right to left. I think at the time, I just thought, when you get too comfortable doing something, maybe this is a time to make a change. And when I started the company, I didn't know the statistics about how many design agencies in London are started by women. I discovered that it was like for, 3% or even less than 3%. The numbers were really low, but I discovered that after I sat right to left. And the risk here is very big. I say 55% because I didn't know much about business, about like running a company. And if you set up your own studio, it's not about how good a designer you are. This is about really managing the overheads, working with people, finding the right people. I mean, I can see Pablo nodding like, so it's all of that aspect that nobody really teaches you. And I thought, why not? What do I have to lose? And sometimes, it's good to have a go. And by then we were doing, quite a few projects with some companies. So I wanted to sort of expand that and work with, work on own my work a little bit. So the risk was very big. I made a lot of mistakes. I documented my mistakes in a notebook called Lessons. I'm not going to open that notebook in this talk. I'm not going to show you. Our positioning was that what I was trying to do is to take kind of the method I was working with in English and Arabic and expand it to other languages. London is known for its food culture. You find this fusion of things in everything and anything, but not in design. So it's like, this is a no-brainer. Why haven't anybody thought about that before? So what I was trying to do is to kind of originate work, but that the work is originated from two perspectives instead of one. And I thought with this play, you could sometimes maybe fall on interesting accidents, maybe carry something from one script to the other. So that was sort of the positioning. And we did some work like that was kind of playing on that. So we were invited last year to run a workshop in Al Ula, which is a city, now Saudi Arabia has opened up to tourism. This is a city that's kind of dates back to before the birth of Jesus Christ. It has these kind of tombs. It's a whole site that was closed. Now it's open to the public. It has these tombs with very small openings and like ragged tops. So we created a typeface that sort of reflects some of this architecture, very small counters for the O. We moved the typeface to kind of expand it to English and Arabic. And then it was supposed to be attached to the Andy Warhol exhibition. So we created stickers that we put on Giphy to make it like kind of more digital. We sort of linked old and new by using the architecture. More doing, it was kind of doing things differently at this time because I was sort of responsible for things going wrong. So you kind of have to really make sure you price well, make sure like the timing of your team is okay. They're kind of not feeling too much stress. So you have to hold it all as a founder of a studio. So this was a project that we pitched for about 4 years ago, and it was only recently launched. The pitch sat with the government. This is a brand for the Emirate of Sharjah. And we did some design ideas. We shared them with the government, and they sat with the government for 2 years. And as soon as I opened my studio, they came back and said, we wanna deliver this. So we just gave them a brand package. We'll just play the video. So by then I had kind of worked out that all these projects that have, lots of stakeholders, sometimes governmental, the best way to present is to give them a short video that's kind of explains the concept, so you don't have to rely on someone talking through a set of slides. And you can send it by WhatsApp. That's actually most often what happens. So I even give them WhatsApp versions. So you can control the presentation because you're never going to be there. Another project we delivered was for Porsche. They approached us to do a Ramadan campaign, and we were inspired. We presented several ideas, but we were inspired by the wall that we call Musharrabiyya, which is like a see-through wall, a paravent of sorts. I think you probably have it also in homes in Spain. So we wanted to create a wall of type where the camera sort of moves through. And because it's Ramadan, the moon is an icon for Ramadan, so we kind of created all the type using sort of two circles. So the type was very circular, and we extended it in a way where you start to discover the words. We wanted it to be like not in your face, like sort of you discover the words. Back and forth on legibility, as it always happens, we delivered about 8 different typographic walls. Some are hanging, some are sort of sitting on the ground. We also kind of showed some references of how to move the camera through the type to show the car. And then eventually, this was a social media campaign in all formats, square, the portrait, landscape. So the type was sort of made the scene for the cars, and it said, our dreams drive us. So that was the line for Ramadan. Also, at Right to Left, I didn't want to forget play, which is the reason why I do this. So I wanted to kind of create a little bit of a space for play, especially that, there's not anything has to be about output and productivity. So because I had designers who spoke different languages, we started to do this project called Type Map, where we kind of explore the relationship between scripts. And we just designed posters when we had a day or two, designed posters, put them on the website. One of the series was called Arranged Marriage. So it's basically taking the same shapes in English and Arabic and making the same letters. So you have the letter T in English and Arabic, J in English and Arabic, F in English and Arabic, made of exactly the same shapes. And we called it Arranged Marriage, just, because it's a bit arranged, like the whole thing. And we created some posters around also the Chinese script, which is not a language I speak, but my team were fluent. So I kind of encouraged them to start to think in a similar way and to work on that. 1 year into Right to Left, Pentagram called me, Marina Willer, and they were like, okay, we're thinking about, putting your name forward for a partner. If you know anything about the way partners join Pentagram, you don't know. They put your name, they vote. Then you have to meet everybody. And then after you meet everybody, they vote again to say, okay, well, this person seems normal. Obviously, when you meet everybody, they don't want to get any odd partner there. It was helpful that I knew some of them, but also so that was kind of 1 year into Right to Left. I was like, do I want to do this? Do I not want to do this? It was kind of but it was also an interesting time because after that 1 year, if you kind of run a company on your own, you do feel quite alone in all the problems because they all land on your lap. And I was looking for a partner, but I didn't really, by then I hadn't kind of stumbled on someone who had the same vision. So it's like, maybe I should consider this. And, when she asked, I thought, oh, so my work's going to be in front of Paula Scher. Yeah, of course. Yeah, put my work up, of course. And then I thought, we'll see what happens. So far, my first 4 months of Pentagram have been a lot of work. So this is why the work is really high. Pentagram is not very new to me because I've worked with them for about 5 years, actually, in my time in London. So I'll show you some of the projects I did. This is a project that I did with Angus Highland. It's also a sort of portfolio rebrand for a media company like the BBC of Abu Dhabi. So we gave them this idea of a gateway. A gateway is something that opens and closes using type. And I'll show you a little bit of, there were about 22 brands, with 22 brand guides. It was a 2-year-long project. So this was the brand, and we tied the portfolio with a typeface that resembles the identity. So this was the typeface we gave them, and the portfolio was an interesting portfolio because these properties, some of them really had a lot of equity, so they existed for a long time, like the newspaper, for example, with these properties, we didn't really want to change a lot of them, but some of them actually weren't that known. So we wanted this idea of gateway to tie everything. So we tried to find a gateway in each and every one of these sort of properties within the portfolio. Majid TV, for example, was a TV and magazine known by everybody. It's for children. So when I say property, some of them were TVs, some of them were radios, and newspaper and print. So Majid was a TV and a magazine. So we worked on a package to kind of redefine the logo, integrate the idea of gateway, but also apply it across TV and magazine. The project was so big that we also collaborated with third parties to create all the TV idents. So in the case of Majid, this was art and craft. So we gave them the kind of brand identity, the thinking behind the brand identity, and it created 6 TV idents and sort of also the bits they put before every advert. So this was, you can see the gateway is like the dot of Majid. And we also aligned this with the magazine as well. Al-Ittihad newspaper was a very old newspaper that had gone through a whole sequence of brandings and rebrandings over time. So we just changed the mark a little bit to make it just cleaner. And every single one of these logos had a guideline document that was about 100 pages. That's what nobody tells you in design. You end up doing a lot of guidelines whenever you create a brand mark. This is a project, I'm going to play it in a bit, it has sound, so that's why it's black. It's a project I did with Dominic Lipa. It was also another city in Saudi Arabia. This is a city called Diriyah. It's built around a national heritage site called At-Turayf. They had been awarded the National Heritage by UNESCO, I think, a few years. So they built a city around the site. And the city was like eat, live, drink, sort of like, they built the city around this sort of touristic destination. We won this in a pitch. So what we did, we presented 4 creative routes, and then the client chose one. They don't always choose the best route, but, this is what we ended up with. I don't always add a Bentley and a Gucci to my videos and the applications, but I was asked to because this was supposed to be a premium destination, apparently, where all the kind of posh shops. So we had like, your usual tote bag and T-shirt, and they were like, oh no, we want a Bentley and a Gucci. So we had to oblige. So this is kind of how the brand looks like. A lot of these projects, sometimes we deliver them, but they don't really come to life in the way we deliver them, no matter how detailed the guidelines are. And that has to do with like management, people changing within the organization. Things change. I think I've never come across a project I think in that case, they changed the Arabic mark I don't know why, but it happens. I forgot what was on the slide, so I'm gonna play it. Oh yes, this is a project that came with us from Right to Left. So we did this brand for a performance conference called PSI 29 with the theme Assemble. So this is kind of like one of the places where my work in theater really has come back in terms of branding something. So the theme for this was backstage, and it kind of all the lettering was based on the rigs of a theater, the sort of kind of movement that you see in a performance. So the lettering was quite rough in the sense that you have the lights, you have things changing and moving. How you'd have projectors. Like this is kind of what you see in the backstage. So that was the theme, and this is gonna be launched in June. It hasn't been case studied yet. So some of the work that we kind of did for them and still are doing for them. So I guess like from being an outsider, this is sort of where we come full circle. I suppose like I've always been on the, I liked to be on the periphery of stuff because it gives you an insight into both sides of things. And at this, maybe at the start of my career, I never thought that this was, this was a really interesting position to be in for a creative because you can really take from whatever you want, like from areas that you are familiar with and sort of mix and match, and that can create something new. So now that I'm at Pentagram, I had to do like the insider because Pentagram is the company. I don't know how I feel about being on the inside, but I can tell you how I would like to fix my pie chart. So I would like it to actually stay a sort of balance between the risk, the play, the expertise, and the amateur. I really do think that when you're doing something you don't know how to do, you learn a lot and you kind of discover things that you can take to another part of your career. I don't like to be too familiar with something because that makes you complacent. So somehow it's good to keep, going towards areas that are perhaps a little unknown. And I think that's sort of where I'd like to be. Hopefully in a year, I'm working on it. And as a final slide, I had to do this, a thought for Palestine. And thank you very much. Questions?
Time for questions. So who's the icebreaker?
Good evening.
Hi.
I'm Mike. I was wondering, you mentioned a lot about play.
Yeah.
How do you usually organize or balance your play with all the work that you're doing?
Right now, I'm not doing very well at balancing play. But normally, what I do with my team, so when I started Right to Left, I made a choice to work with kind of junior designers. And partly because I felt junior designers don't take themselves too seriously when it comes to work. So I could easily give them like a bunch of letters and say, okay, well, this is what the brand mark looks like. This is how each letter looks like. Have a go at playing. Sometimes when I worked with people who were more senior, I found that this kind of took away some of their expertise. So if you know how to actually craft a word to do a word mark in English, you're a senior designer, you know how to do it, and you've nailed it down to a T. When I give you another language, you're gonna feel a little bit like you're stumbling. So I thought it worked better with junior designers because they don't really feel so precious. And that sort of turned into a playful method. So sometimes I don't give them the full picture. I just say, this is what the letters look like. And it happened also, like sometimes when I used to work in companies, I would draw something and say, oh, well, it looks like an elephant or it looks like a turtle. And clearly I don't see a turtle, I see the letters. But if you don't read the letters, you start to see shapes. So I thought there's something there, why not actually push that and play a little bit with that idea and see what comes out. And it's about the fear of making mistakes. You know, when you play, you're not scared to make mistakes. You're playing. You're just enjoying yourself. And I think there's something there when sometimes we're too worried about making mistakes that we start to kind of work only in our comfortable area, which makes the work look the same. While if you're playing, you might discover things that you weren't really intending. That, like, you know, if you don't have a direction of travel, this could be an interesting format. So when we have time, we try to work that way. Especially at the beginning of every project, I try to make some time for play with my team.
Hi.
Hi.
First of all, thank you. It was
Thank you.
very inspired. You said that it was difficult when you arrived to London because the culture difference.
Yeah.
So I want to ask if you are still feeling like this after so many years in with experience like in Pentagram. You still feel this?
No, I don't. I think like you have to learn a bit about football, have to learn all the expressions, learn to cook a very good British roast, learn a little bit about the Queen, and then you're good. Yeah, that's fish and chips, or a curry. Actually, a curry is a national dish. So it takes some time. I think London is not the city. So every city is different. London, because it's so big. It's full of expats, but also like the British people in London have families, so often on the weekends they're busy. So you can make sort of familiarity in that environment with people who are like-minded. There's so many expats. Like my circle of friends is people from all around the world. And those who stick it out in London are actually some of the best people you meet around the world because they sort of have to relate. And when you relate, you're sort of bending a little bit to be more open-minded, to sort of give and take. So it takes about 3 years if you're thinking of moving to London. I think just football as well is like big deal. Not that I know about football, but I know the clubs at least. But yeah. And then you have to go to the pub a lot with people. That's where you learn most of the stuff.
Good evening.
Hi.
I wanted to ask a question that I hope it's not too personal. So feel free to not answer if you don't. But I was wondering, like, how can you work both in a like corporate and big environment, and maybe if you want like work in a more like ethical department, like doing activism, and I was wondering whether if they like collide between the two words, maybe working with as we saw before, like with Saudi Arabia and other countries, and like how can you put together these things if they're not?
Yeah, good question. I'm going to answer that question.
Thank you.
So on the, I think there is a big sort of argument at the moment, especially in places like London or Paris or Germany, where they say we don't work with Saudi Arabia. And my position on this is very clear and very kind of black and white. At the moment, we have a genocide happening in Palestine, and it's the US and the UK who are actually not stopping it. They are vetoing the actions that all the other countries are trying to say, please stop the fighting. Children are dying. I mean, I'm not going to go there as to the scale of horror that is happening there. So then if you take that position, I wouldn't work with anything American. I wouldn't even live in the UK because my tax money is funding weapons that are killing children in Gaza. So if I'm going to take the morally pure sort of position and say, I'm not going to work with the Saudi Arabia because their government is corrupt, then I will take that position on every single government out there because money is dirty and capitalism is not a system made for the poor. So then, you know, when you get there, it's easy to kind of say, well, I'm not going to work with them because they're bad guys. But honestly, Saudi Arabia has been trying to stop the war in Gaza. And what's the saying? Like if you have a house of glass, don't throw stones. I think I'm now transliterating from Arabic. There's a, it's almost like, what do you do really? As designers, we're not politicians, we're not doctors, we're not lawyers. We can't stop this horror that's going on. We are designers. Now, for the projects that I did in Saudi Arabia, I wouldn't work with anything related to weapons or related to, that doesn't have a sort of human aspect in a way. But when it comes to designing a city brand, I think of the fact that in Saudi Arabia now, rules have changed. Women can really don't have to get veiled. Everybody is going to college. There's a lot of support for women to actually go up the ladder, start businesses, do things. And if I can inspire one little girl in Saudi Arabia to kind of go after what she wants, that's enough for me. So that's really my position. I don't really, I don't do like, okay, well, the Saudi government is bad. Every government, which government is doing a good thing? I mean, I don't know. You guys are good, pretty good actually, on the scale of bad, on the scale of, what can I say? Yeah, so, I mean, who's doing well right now? South Africa, actually, they're like, pushing this, but what can you say? Like, my tax money is actually funding a war that I don't agree with. And this happened not now. This has been happening since the Iraq War in 2003. Millions demonstrated for the Iraq War, and Tony Blair still went to war and still used our money. And what did he do later? He apologized. I'm not gonna apologize for what I want to do. So, and I think before we judge nations or like a whole culture based on the actions of its government, try to look around. Like now, if you meet a Russian person, I did an interview when I was at Try to Left with a Russian designer who applied. And I made a point at the beginning of the interview to tell her, look, I know, probably if you tell people you're Russian now, everybody kind of projects Putin on you. And I know this is probably, some Russians do not agree with the war. What do we do? They can't do anything about it. These are the systems that we voted for in the world. And if you want to change something about the world, then maybe you're in the wrong business. Go be a politician. I fully support you. If you... Thank you. There's one more question.
Hi.
Hi.
On a bit of a lighter note, have you got any advice on grasping a different alphabet completely in terms of design?
Sorry, I can't hear you. Can you repeat, please?
Yeah. Sorry. Do you have any tips on grasping a different alphabet in terms of design? Because obviously you work with different languages and stuff like that. Designing a different language, do you have any tips for that, or how do you get started with it?
Well, I think if you want to design in Chinese, you have to learn Chinese, maybe go live in China for a while and then kind of understand the culture. Then somehow you can start to, because the letters kind of connect to the culture, connect to the whole way of being, right? So I think that's maybe take a gap year and go somewhere that you're interested in and just immerse yourself. And that's kind of what you do with anything, really. So I don't know if that's simple advice. I don't have any more wisdom. Can you help me? No?
Hi, I'm Bob. I'm an American designer.
Hello.
And I was wondering, now that you're actually design, or are you operating more in art direction?
Yeah. So in Right to Left, I was still designing. I would get in deep into the files and kind of every now and then give a lesson to my team. This is how you build a file to make it quickly editable, right? So when you do a bit of motion, you kind of show them, you have to think 6 steps in advance so that when the client gives you feedback, you don't have to redo the whole thing. You can just kind of adapt and move. in those 4 months at Pentagram, I don't even know where the files are saved, and I don't like this. so so that's not gonna be the case. That's partly because I have a very small team at the moment, and I have no PM. But my PM started on Monday, so I think I want to stay in touch with the tool and sort of able to draw or just kind of do a bit of work. I don't want to be the partner who just can't use, because tools change very quickly. So as a freelancer, I made a conscious effort to stay on top of technological changes, right? So every now and then, Illustrator has a new version, they have all these new things. So you kind of need to spend some time to understand what's happening. I think it's important to know what tools can do, even the new tools like AI, everything that's happening kind of in that area. Otherwise, you can't think. So motion, for example, to think motion, I need to be able to understand what I can do with the tool. So it's kind of essential to do good work, to stay a little bit in touch with the tool. I don't necessarily need to be the fastest motion designer ever, but I need to understand motion, and to understand motion, sometimes trying a few things helps you stay in touch. But yeah, the last 4 months I won't lie. But I'll bring that back on the books, hopefully soon.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for the great presentation. My question is very simple. Where do you see yourself, your brand, 4 years from now?
4 years.
Yes.
Why 4 specifically?
Because I came from this event called 4 Years From Now.
Oh, okay.
That
What
is
did
why.
they tell you there? Maybe there's some wisdom. 4 years. I don't know. I'll probably be still at Pentagram. What can I say? You don't do Pentagram for like 5 minutes. You have to be there for the long run. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'll probably still be there. I had an idea when I started Right to Left. I had a very clear plan. I thought I'm going to do Right to Left for 5 years, build this company up, sell it, and retire on a beach somewhere. Like, that was a plan. And then Marina called me and she changed my plan. So what can I do? I can't. I need to agree with 10 other people. Or like 24, actually.
Thank you.
More questions?
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm curious, from the little bit you said about who you've recruited as designers, how do you recruit designers? Like a little bit about the logistics, and then also what do you prioritize when you want to bring someone on board?
Very good question. I didn't have a strategy when I started Right to Left. Basically, this is the first time I was recruiting. Before, I used to collaborate with people whose work I knew. Maybe a little bit when I was delivering Abu Dhabi Media at Pentagram, I had a bit of experience of finding freelancers. I think it's the hardest thing about building a proper team is to find the right people. And you have to accept that not every person is right for you. So I'm not a micromanager. You have to kind of understand how you work. I'm not a micromanager. I like people who I can kind of tell them what we need doing, and they will run with it and just call me when they need something. And then when we have to review, we can edit and change. In terms of portfolios, this is another thing, like going back to this idea of potential. I've seen a lot of portfolios where you can't quite tell what the person can or cannot do. People use things sometimes in their portfolio that they barely touched or they did something small on. And you could very easily, when you're interviewing someone, if they're well-spoken, you could very easily not kind of, they'll tell you they're a senior, you believe that they're a senior, and then when you hire them, it doesn't really kind of show. I look for a good attitude to, I think everyone does. Nobody wants to work with someone they don't want to see every day, right? These are people they're going to spend a lot of time with. So you need to find people that, you could easily go to the pub with them and have a drink. So nice people, not sort of like big egos. That's never good. It's not a team player. And people who more have like a growth mentality in a way, like they like to learn. usually in any one portfolio, I look for one good thing. So I look for one strength. If I can look at a portfolio and understand this person is typographically strong, or this person has a sensibility for color, you can tell very quickly. If you look at the portfolio in 2 minutes, you will see something. So I think if you're building portfolios to apply for agencies, think about this. What's the one thing that whoever's seeing your portfolio can actually see that this kind of makes you tick? Like typography, you love typography, or you love color, or you love illustration. And then the next thing, like on the interview, you have to, I like people using words like learning, right? So some people don't, like it depends. It's a character. You want to have a person who you can work with every day and who are there to also sort of grow. And loyalty, I think, is important for me personally. Like, I consider my team as like a little family. When one team member, the first team member who left, feels like a breakup a bit. Don't like it. But it happens. You just have to accept it's part of, but people want different things in life. Sometimes they move on. So, yeah.
More questions? Okay, big thanks to Samar then. Thank you very
guys.
much.
Thank you so much. Was that